Buenos nachos, amigos, and welcome to another fantastic episode of Record Breakers. I'm Petey Rave, your man with no plan. Here with me, as always, is my team of record reviewers. My team, we've got Drew.
Hey.
We've got Brett.
Gonna give it to you.
And we got Patrick.
Howdy.
We are gathered to talk about music once again, and the provider of said music is none other than Brett. Brett, what do you got for us this week?
I brought an album that I knew we had not heard anything similar to, really. Something that has been floating around in my music collection as sort of a go-to when I just need to kill a large amount of time and have something that is not distracting but has something there to grab a hold of. So I brought the Wynton Kelly Trio with Wes Montgomery's album Smokin at the Half Note.
Yeah, it is a fascinating little piece of jazz music for sure. Drew, what expectations did you have coming into this album?
Well, I know the members of Wynton Kelly Trio at one point played with, I believe, Miles Davis. So I have heard those guys before. Knew they were some great jazz musicians. I also have heard Wes Montgomery play his guitar before. So I know what I'm getting into there. I've never heard this album though, and I've never heard the two together. So I was really interested to see what we were going to get.
Patrick, what expectations did you have coming into this album?
Pretty similar to Drew's, as I've heard Miles Davis stuff from this era, and I've heard some Wes Montgomery, but I had not heard Miles Davis's rhythm section play with Wes Montgomery. So, yeah.
Yeah. What would be the themes and elements that you would pick out of this, Brett? That would be the key things.
Well, I mean, the one thing that you're going to figure out very, very shortly after you start listening is that you can hear like tables moving around, chairs squeaking, clanking glasses, and stuff like that going on. This is a very, very old style live album recording, and it even has a presenter that makes an appearance right at the really inconvenient part of one song, but. It's a very old. I mean, it's not the way that they would make a live album today. You got that, like, of the sounds that you're getting from the musicians. Wes Montgomery is pretty famous for the way that he played guitar. He would never use a pick. He would just strum with his thumb, and it gives you this weird, like, brushing sound. And he would do that a lot of times using an octave. And that was colloquially known as the Naptown sound because he was from my hometown of Indianapolis. And that was sort of how he played and was surprisingly fast without using a pick. And then you'll also find out that they didn't have a really good way of mixing multiple instruments because the piano, like, I don't know if there's a guy actually moving a microphone around. I don't know exactly what technologies they had to mix this album. But there's a little bit of dynamics that you can hear. Sometimes the piano will be a little bit quieter than guitar, and it's a very antiquated way of recording an album, and I find it kind of neat. Back when you find old jazz albums where you can hear a guy rocking in a rocking chair in the background, and like a guy walking into the room on accident, that kind of stuff makes me smile. But this is definitely, there was a live studio audience. Yes. You can hear them.
And some conversations too, and some introductions and stuff. Drew, what would be the themes and elements that caught your attention?
Well, to me, the Wynton Kelly Trio is great here. Wynton Kelly's sort of stands out a lot. He gained his notoriety as I said earlier, as a backing member with Miles Davis, and he could stand alongside Miles Davis as sort of an equal, in my opinion, and that to me tells you all you need to know about that piano player. Paul Chambers' bass work is great. You have Cobb's drumming. It's just really, really fantastic. Then you get into Wes Montgomery. Wes Montgomery's guitar playing is something that still inspires and something that people are still trying to emulate today as far as jazz music goes. And it's just fantastic to hear. The mix of the two is great. There's a reason why these versions of songs like 4 on 6 and such are sort of seen as the standard. And we'll go into more about that later. But it's just utterly, the musicianship on display here is just great. Not only that, but as Brett said, to me, the live atmosphere that you get with this album, that you can hear sort of small conversations. Can't hear what they're saying, obviously, but you can hear them in the background and you can hear that live feel to it. In other live albums, you have the audience sort of used as something that they bring up. Like the engineer will like sort of, oh, okay, now the band's talking, so we're going to turn up the volume on the background noise of the audience to give the live feel. But like otherwise, you will never like hear those in the background like while the band's playing. But this, you can hear the background noise constantly. And that to me is kind of cool because you can kind of sit back, close your eyes, and sort of imagine yourself in this smoky jazz club, like waiting for a drink or something. And I think that's something that's just sort of fun that you don't really get anymore.
Mm-hmm. Patrick, what theme song has caught your attention about this record?
It is from like, jazz has gone through a lot of eras, you know, but this is sort of, I think, where everyone would call kind of the golden age, sort of the late 50s, the early 60s, when guys like Miles Davis and Wes Montgomery were running around making new stuff and playing this style of jazz. This is before stuff got really progressive and fusiony, you know, just, you know, half a decade later, and sort of after the big band swing sort of thing. So it's sort of in that golden era of jazz when all these, you know, legendary albums were created. Wes Montgomery is, I don't think there's ever been a guitar player since that it ever sounded like him, because, you know, Brett plays guitar, Drew plays bass, and I assume at some point in his life he's picked up a pick with it. I play guitar poorly. That's what a pick looks like. It is this tiny, tiny, thin piece of plastic, and your thumb is a big fat hunk of flesh and bone and fingernail. And they're like, the notion that Wes Montgomery could be as accurate and as you know, dexterous with this big hunk of flesh that, you know, most guitar players are with a pick still blows my mind. And because of it, he had that very unique sound where notes were almost rolled into a little bit, because it was a softer, you know, something softer hitting the string than, you know, a plastic or wood or whatever material a pick he would have wanted to use. And it's cool. And this is still before the notion of shredding kind of took over guitar playing, you know, 20 years after this. But there are little moments where you're like, Wes Montgomery probably could shred if he knew what shredding was. And I just find that amusing. There are these little sweeps and single note runs where you're just like, that is kind of just a tiny bit jazz shredding, and it's cool.
And, you know, to add on to that a little bit, the guy didn't pick up a guitar until he was 20. He didn't know how to read music, which is two things that jazz musicians of that era couldn't really say. It's not like something that you just take to.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's a reason why there hasn't been another one of those dudes floating around. It's kind of rare.
Kind of like the Bo Jackson of jazz guitar. Kind of never really practiced.
Honestly, that's probably not an inappropriate description. Mm-hmm. He was
just a freak athlete, or a freak, you know,
a freak musician.
Exactly. But yeah, what would be some of the key tracks, Brett, for you? What are some of your favorite tracks to key in on?
Well, I mean, this is a jazz set in the, you know, era when bebop was still king. And it really didn't have a whole lot of bossa nova tracks, which was just funny, but because that era they started like putting Latin beats where it didn't really fit. But it really starts off like a good jazz show should, with an upbeat tune that does the classic. Here's the members of the band that are playing tonight. They started playing the opening track, No Blues. It's an old Miles Davis song. and they give you the classic round robin, where like everybody got to do whatever they wanted to do, and as long as they got to the end of it, get back to the root and play one more time. That was a really, they gave them enough time to get around to whatever they wanted to do. It's like a 13-minute song. Yeah. But it's you got this. That told you what caliber of musician you were working with. I also enjoyed Willow Wheat for Me. It's a really great example of how Wes did his octave slides, and it's a really simple old jazz progression. It's an old standard, but it's a simple progression where everybody had enough time to get their runs in. I liked Surrey with the fringe on top, mainly because it was a great jam track. You could tell that the bass line and the drums were like dead on, because like on an upright bass, a double bass, if you hit a sour note, everybody's going to know, because you're most likely playing a note that's within the chord that the piano or the guitar that are both fighting for space are at. Yeah. So you have a relative pitch to hit, and you can't really see visually on the neck of that bass whether you're going to be right or not. I didn't hear any sour notes from the bass line, no matter how ridiculous those bass lines were. There's a lot of good songs, like, real quick, Misty is one of my favorite jazz standards. This probably isn't my favorite version of it, but it was nice to hear it. Yeah. And the album closed strong with an old Train song. But it's an album to be devoured in you just sit down and play it. But if you're going to pick high notes out, those would be the eyebrow raising moments for me.
Drew, what would be some of the key tracks for you?
Well, I'm going to start out with Willow Wheat for me. Not do the Record Breakers thing, but because to me, this one just was fantastic from top to bottom. The guitar and the piano sort of looping across each other and folding back in and going back and forth. That to me is just great. And the hook of this song especially was one that just does exactly what a hook does. It hooks you and brings you in and intrigues you. And that hook started from the beginning, and you hear it and it grabs you, and it's like, okay, this is going to be a fun one. 4 on 6, the piano is great. There are some great piano runs in that. There is some great groove being played with the bass and the drums. But Wes just flexes a muscle on 4 on 6 that I think is just really cool. And it just sounds fantastic. And this version of it is cited many places as like the version of it, right? Sort of the version that if you're going to do 4 on 6, you kind of want to go back to it and base your version on this one. And there's a reason for that. And then I'm also going to talk about Surrey with the Fringe on top, because it's from, I believe, Oklahoma, if I'm not mistaken. And that's Rodgers and Hammerstein. They don't mess around when they compose. So basing a jazz tune off of a Rodgers and Hammerstein composed song isn't a bad plan. And this is just really cool. The guitar being used in a very lyrical sort of fashion was fun to hear. And it's just great to hear a song like that done in this sort of way. It was just, from top to bottom of this record, you could keep pointing at different songs, like No Blues, like you said, that does the jazz thing of going around the horn, or Unit 7 was great. It all comes out really, really great, but those three to me stood out as having something special to them.
Mm-hmm. Patrick, what would be some of the key tracks for you?
I really enjoyed Unit 7 because the way the guitar and the piano were trading off, and which is the jazz thing to do, where one instrument takes the lead for a little bit and then the other one picks it up. But the guitar and piano are fundamentally different instruments in the way you play them and in what you can get out of them in terms of sound. But I found it interesting how they tried to, in a lot of ways, replicate the other part when they were in the lead, and then the other instrument in the back. They sort of switched places, and it still kind of made sense. It just had a different tone to it. No Blues is really good. Again, more that like this album, I think, is really, really hinges on Wynton Kelly and Wes Montgomery just syncing up and playing super, super great work together. Jazz is one of those things that I am not nearly talented enough to do correctly, but if it's the difference between jazz and really good jazz is that sort of interaction between two people and their ability to play off of each other and to work with each other and to support one another. And I think Wynton Kelly and Wes Montgomery they had something going together when they recorded this that was kind of unbelievable. Surrey with the Fringe on top is about as catchy as a jazz tune's gonna get in the best kind of way. Like it's from a musical. It is a little more catchy, a little more poppy, but it's still really, really good. It got a nice arrangement. The performance was really good on it. But just sort of in general, like this is a really good example of what the golden era of jazz was. And if that's something you just aren't familiar with or are curious about, this is a great place to start, because it is, you get that whole smoky club vibe, but you also get really, really spectacular playing by kind of everyone involved.
If you haven't taken Jazz and Popular Music 101 at community college, here's a great thing for you to substitute that for. At least get started. Let's go back around the horn, as it were, like we said, and talk about conclusive thoughts. Drew, what would be your thoughts overall on the record?
My thoughts overall is that if you have any thought that you may enjoy some jazz music, do yourself a favor and go for this one. The playing is great. The musicianship is top notch. And the feel of the record, that live feel that I was talking about earlier, was just a joy. And that's what I would kind of describe this album as. It was just a joy. It was so much fun to listen to, and so great to hear music like this. These are the types of albums that remind me why jazz is just so much fun and such a great genre to dig into.
Patrick, what would be your conclusive thoughts about the album overall?
So I had this thought, and it's a little bit esoteric and just me being weird, that jazz like this could not exist today in the sort of creation sense, because music today is owned and operated by the artist who wrote the song. The notion of jazz was you compose a piece and then you give that shit to everyone and let them do their thing with it. It's very much, you could draw some very real parallels between late 50s, early 60s jazz with the notion of a standard and everything, to modern, remix culture where you take somebody else's song and put your own spin on it. It's taking like the notion that a song is not the original recording of a song is not the be all end all. It is the beginning. When Miles Davis wrote No Blues, that was the beginning of that song. It was not the end of it. His version is one of hundreds. 4 on 6. It's one of hundreds. It's a song many people have played, because the way they created this, it was at a time when they really wanted everyone to take something and make it their own. And I'm saying if you had Wes Montgomery was, it was now, and he had a record label and he wrote a song 4 on 6, no one else would ever be allowed to play it and make money off of it. It would be, it would be verboten. They couldn't put it on their album without paying ridiculous rights back. And you got something really cool out of that period. And now I'll shut up.
It's definitely a different time and place, for sure. It's like open source software, but for music.
That's another good comparison.
So, Brett, what would be your conclusive thoughts about the album overall?
It's a product of its time, the mid-'60s. It's a very weird time for music. A lot of things were coming out at that time, but it was about the end of the era where when you go to a place to, a nightclub, you expect live music. And these were people who made their living playing live music, not recording it, although they did that. But these are people that had to hit every note every night. And you can tell because they hit every note, even the ridiculous ones, in this one take at a nightclub. You don't get a whole lot more of Wes Montgomery because, like most of these guys were dead by the 70s. I think the drummer is the only guy that's around anymore. They were getting to the point in the late 60s when Wes was doing Beatles songs. And things were starting to get real neat. But we don't get much more of it after that. A lot of those the jazz guys fizzled out or died. That happened. But if you're gonna want to listen to an album and you like guitar jazz, you're not gonna have horns beetle dooping on this album. But if you can stand a piano and a guitar going at it, this is one of the best examples of it that I can think of. Mm-hmm. And you can see a lot of the tricks, the bag of tricks that are being played on, at least that I could tell on the guitar parts. Those you can see at any high scale like guitar player that's out there today.
Yeah. That pretty much puts a bow on that aspect of our show. Our complete thoughts. Now we get to our main event of the evening, what we've all been waiting for. We get to our haiku reviews. I'll start with Drew. Drew, what is your haiku?
Cool tunes for cool cats from virtuosos of jazz. Refrigerator.
Pulling the old that's the standby. Thank you.
Can't get much cooler than a refrigerator unless you're talking about a freezer.
I actually thought of that joke, and I'm like, nope, gotta do it. Gotta do
it. Patrick, what is your haiku?
Golden Age of Jazz, a legendary pairing, deserves its status.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to go ahead and do my haiku. Sit back and relax. Travel in time to a great night at the half note. Brett, last but not least, what is your haiku?
In his element, Wes's big contribution to the world of jazz.
Jazz. And that concludes our thoughts on this record. Go check it out on our Spotify playlist. We're curating that playlist for you guys, so you can play Record Breakers the home game. Listen to it. Definitely listen to it. Like I said, if you didn't get a chance to take jazz and popular music in community college, here's your course. I'll give you your syllabus. We'll have it written down. Not on that Spotify playlist, because I checked, unless you're in the UK. Is going to be next week's record, provided by none other than Drew. Drew, what do you got for us next week?
This is a band that some folks might know by their hit, Our House.
Where is that located?
High Shoulder.
Where house?
In the middle of our street, actually.
Oh.
Yes. Some people in America might know them from that. They had quite a bit more success over in the UK. It's a little album called Wonderful, a band Madness.
Will it be wonderful? Wait till next week to find out. But that's it for this week. Of course, you can find us all over the internet. Patrick is at the Swagger. Brett is at HibbityBibbard, HIBBITYBIBBARD. Drew is at Exclusive for X. I'm at PD Rave. The show is at 4 Record Breakers. That's the number 4 Record Breakers. RecordBreakersPodcast.com. RecordBreakersPodcast@gmail.com. Could join the conversation. Huey or Hootie. Huey and the Blowfish or Hootie and the News. It's an ongoing thing. It's a bit we will never let die.
No, it's our plastic pants.
Exactly. Join the conversation on Twitter, hashtag Huey or Hootie. But that's it. Until next time, hasta los huevos.
I ain't never scared.
I'm rethinking how I'm going to arrange these 3 monitors.